Welcome to my podcast, and today I'm sitting in the morning room, which is a beautiful sunlit room on the south side of the castle, and my guest is one of my bestest girlfriends, who I met at university, I think rather too many years than I'm going to admit to. So welcome, Smiles. Thank you so much for coming with me today. Now, my bestest girlfriend is actually really called Susanna de Ferry Foster, but she was born Susanna Smiley. And as you can imagine, she was nicknamed Smiles. So throughout the podcast, she smiles to me, and I hope to all of you. But Smiles, I remember very clearly meeting you at St Andrews University, where we both went after school, and when I arrived there, I thought you were incredibly part of the trendy crowd, and you were a fantastic horse rider, and you were starting a horse riding club or something. I thought, oh, golly,
I remember it vividly. Do you remember we were outside the supermarket, the only supermarket in St Andrews, and you had wanted to seek me out because you were interested in joining the riding club I'd recently resurrected. And I'd heard that you were the it girl around town and the person who threw the best parties and was definitely someone to get to know. And so we did meet. I was so overwhelmed that, that you were interested in meeting me that I slammed the boot of my little car shut, and there was a mop inside and it smashed the black back windscreen. And
by which time I'd walked away, so I didn't know of this disaster. I'm so sorry. And which was extraordinary. And then, obviously, in one of our years at St Andrews, you very kindly let me share your house with you. It was an amazing year because you and your parents had cleverly bought a flat in St Andrews in the middle of the town, which you could then rent out to golfers, etc., during the summer, and was available for you to share and rent to your girlfriends and other friends during the term times.
It was. I was so fortunate because it was lovely to be able to choose who I had as a flatmate, and actually financially it really worked for us. I mean, as you said, we let it out during the holidays, and it enabled my brother and I to put a deposit on our first flat in London eventually.
No, it was.
But what amuses me is that, of course, in those days, you were a tenant of my mother's, and now she is living in one of the cottages in the park, and you are her landlady.
I know.
And it's like, it's gone full turn.
I know. I think she's a better tenant than I necessarily was all the time.
I couldn't possibly comment.
I had to write several begging letters saying I'm so sorry about the party and the fact that there were rather too many people in the flat, and they drank probably a little bit too much. It was a little bit too noisy, whereas she's obviously a really charming tenant. I have to say, she does lose most things, though, most of the time. So she's a regular person up at the estate office because something has been lost. And if you go down to her house, you catch her disease, and you always lose everything in there too, which is so funny. But anyway, it's just a joy having her here, and I hope she's happy going for walks with her dog Alfie, and I've got a dog Alfie, and living opposite Gwen and other wonderful people in the park. So it's a community, and I think particularly post-COVID, it's being part of a community, and that really helps us go forwards, doesn't it? Definitely.
I was just thinking back again to those St Andrews days. It was just a wonderful few years there, and I think we really honed our hosting skills.
I say, I think I got a degree in partying, but then after that, both of us became a little bit more serious as you joined different financial institutions, from Casanove's to other banks, and I then became a chartered accountant, I think to everyone's surprise, including my own and my parents.
Well, I think your father very much insisted that you a professional qualification would set you in good stead, and
yes.
He didn't prescribe whether
it
should be accountancy or law, but very much encouraged you down that route, which was really good advice.
I think it was, and I never regret doing it, although funnily enough in today's world I spend more time on legal contracts and wonder if that wouldn't have been more useful. Having said that, I found the knowledge you pick up as a chartered accountant and in some ways the elegance of the debit and credits is incredibly useful, and hopefully it means that Geordie and I are not being such busy fools. We need to make sure that it does work out for us here, because we are, after all, a business.
It's a partnership of equals that way, you know.
Well, I don't know about that, and also I understand about budgets, because I don't think I've ever hit a budget on decoration here, but anyway. I do remember, Smiles, that, and then later on, we've always shared a love of horses, and you were point-to-pointing at one stage and very kindly let me look after one of your point-to-pointers.
Oh, dear Reggie. Yes.
As he got older.
I think Geordie rather enjoyed having him as part of the stables, because whilst he was a racehorse, he was a very civilised ride, and he was a big horse, but he had the most wonderful walk and canter, and as long as you didn't point him at a fence. Do you remember?
I do.
A time where I got slightly run away with.
And instead of I think I was howling with laughter as I went in pursuit.
I lost most of
your tack, actually. It flew out as you ploughed onwards. And I suddenly realised that he had taken you 3 miles round point to point. So this was going to be quite a long canter on my part to try and catch up with you at some point. That was extraordinary. He was a lovely person, except he was impossible to catch.
Yes, and various ruses to get him into a corner were completely ineffectual.
I perfected one actually with a lunging rope. Yes, I did. And
how on earth did that work?
He actually respected the rope, which was reasonably high, so he didn't ever try and jump it. And as he was then brought closer and closer into a corner, he looked at me and said, "Okay, here's my head collar then." and we went like that. But it was a two-person catch.
I always used to reckon you had to add another 45 minutes to your riding time just to catch him.
That also might be true, and then not easy sometimes. But also, of course, whenever you're in a hurry, horses never do what you want. It's always quite interesting. And then, of course, Smiles, you came to my wedding to Geordie. So
absolutely. Gosh, that was lovely. That was in the Savoy Chapel.
It was a very small wedding, and it was a lovely wedding. It was after my father had died. My uncle had flown over to give me away, and it's a beautiful, beautiful chapel next door to the Savoy Hotel, and it's still part of the Duchy of Lancaster, so as in part of the gift of the Queen, now the King, part of the Crown. So it was just really special.
And you looked a bit like heroine out of a Jane Austen novel. You had that wonderful dress, which very much was, you know.
Well, I loved Jane Austen. Such an extraordinary author. So we definitely spent a lot of time growing up together, and you organised my hen party around London, which was enormous fun, that treasure hunt.
I know. I did rhyming couplets for all the clues. My mother did help on that. I don't know if I ever admitted that.
No.
You were very keen that it involved all your sisters, all 5 of them, and some of them were still at school and weren't earning, and you were very insistent that it shouldn't be expensive and it should be inclusive and it should, involve London. And
yes.
I think I met the brief.
No, it was amazing. It was an amazing day, Smiles, and then after that, as I was living between London and here, and then increasingly down here, you've been on many holidays with me down here. And when you first came here, Smiles, I guess my parents-in-law were giving lunches or dinners here. Of course, they never actually moved into the castle in the way that we have, but it was still an amazing place to come and dine, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. I mean, I remember you were living in one of the cottages down near where my mother is now.
Yeah.
And we walked up, and I just remember just the view as you came round the corner and saw that just amazing view. And it never goes away. I mean, I've been here I don't know how many times, and there's still that anticipation and excitement as you draw up. And obviously it's much more lived in now. It's very much more of a home than I first remember it, and the treat of staying here and getting the Highclere experience.
Because I'm from my point of view, you have the cars coming up with the lights on, perhaps on a Friday evening, and then the lights spilling out of the castle, which I always think is warm and wonderful, and Louis and Matthew, whoever's there, opening the door, and the excitement of the arrivals for me as well, because we work so hard, Geordie and I. But the other side of it is just relaxing and sharing it with friends, which is so special, and showing people up to their bedroom and welcoming them with a cocktail. Can't go wrong.
I do remember one New Year's Eve, and I brought along my eldest son, Harry, who must have been less than 1. And
oh God, that was so funny.
We put him with some difficulty to sleep, and enjoyed a lovely New Year's Eve. We did lots of reeling, and then a piper decided that it would be much better to stand on the upstairs balcony, and stood right outside Harry's bedroom and started up the bagpipes at 5 to 12.
Yes, I do remember that. It was not, I remember your face. It was not a happy space.
He did not enjoy the sound of bagpipes.
Whereas I absolutely love it. But it was really, really funny. One New Year's Eve, when you were here, I'd hired a karaoke machine.
Oh, I'll never forget.
It was just so simply appallingly embarrassing. I remember several of my friends standing there with tears running down their face. It was just so dreadful. What's rather wonderful is all these years later, and I don't feel that much older than when I met you, you've then come on board to help me with the Earl and the Pharaoh book, when I thought, oh my goodness, how can I complete all this research? Because I realised how many horses and how involved the 5th Earl was in horse breeding. And I just didn't physically have the time. And I remembered from university that you'd done a thesis on bloodstock and breeding. So I thought, I think Smiles needs something to do.
I was trying to find a way to make my economics degree a little bit more interesting. And I realised I was going to have to spend most of the Easter holidays researching for my dissertation. And so I came up with this rather brilliant idea that I would try and get it involved with racing and the bloodstock industry. And I think most of the work I had to do was persuading the powers that be that it was a viable subject. Anyway, I spent my Easter holidays in Newmarket, which was rather fun. But anyway, yes, I adored working with you on the Earl and the Pharaoh. I mean, it was quite difficult to get some of the information. He started his racing sort of interest in France with half a dozen horses in France before he then sort of set up a similar stable in Newmarket. This was before Dick Dawson's time, but it was a challenge to locate the information and to sort of get it all together. But it's research is something I really enjoy.
Well, it's fantastic, and I think we've now got a whole collection of documents and archives which explore the subject in a far better way. And having done that sort of horsepower, I'd done some rudimentary research into the 5th Earl's love of cars and planes. So I appropriated you for further help around that. And so, some of the information you found and distilled was just brilliant. It was so interesting. Some of the stories, the story you found about the 5th Earl and the white shoes.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So he was at Ascot in the royal enclosure, and the Prince of Wales, who was a stickler for etiquette, suddenly noticed that there was this gentleman wearing white shoes in the royal enclosure. It's a real no-no. Anyway, he sent down some representative to tell Lord Carnarvon to remove himself until he could dress properly. And far from being outraged at being removed from the royal enclosure, he just made his way to the paddock and spent the rest of the afternoon there watching the horses, where I think he was much happier.
He really did love the horses, didn't he? Just not as well as the social occasion. And
yes.
He thoroughly enjoyed being slightly outrageous in his dress. He was quite a dandy, which I hadn't realised at all. And I remember he attended his sister's wedding reception, his dressing gown, clearly an white silk dressing gown. But
I mean, a true eccentric, but also quite practical. I mean, his hats, which everyone commented on, were quite broad-rimmed and obviously suitable for, when he was out in Egypt in the heat. And there was a practical element to some of the way he dressed, and he didn't really give a two hoots about what people thought. No. Which is rather lovely, actually.
No, it is rather lovely. He was not dressing for other people's approbation, was he? He was dressing to amuse himself or for practicality. I think Geordie must have inherited his great-grandfather's love of racing and racehorses, and of course his father, because his father was racing manager to the Queen, and that particular topic gave the late Queen such joy, and her face would light up when she was here.
Oh, absolutely. Although probably not quite on the scale of Geordie's great-grandfather, who I think probably around about the early 1900s had about 30 horses in training, and that was excluding the broodmares. Just a completely different scale in those days.
Yes, no, I think we're not going to go quite there, but it gives Geordie such pleasure. He loves it. From the foal being born to getting on the racetrack, it's such excitement.
And a winner recently.
And a winner, I know, marvellous.
Yeah.
So there was that one. And then, of course, I do remember, because I'd researched de Havilland and done quite a lot of work on the plane first taking off from here in 1910. And I had some basic knowledge of Geoffrey Moore Brabazon, again, one of the earliest aviators, fascinating characters in this country, but you managed to pull up a lot more on Moore Brabazon than I knew.
There was some very, very good local paper reporting on particularly de Havilland's first flight, and there was a journalist who wrote several pieces for the Newbury Herald, I think. You had the British Newspaper Archives access for me, and I was able to glean quite a lot more from that.
But it was so interesting, because it's by putting the right words in the archive, isn't it?
It's the search, it's the search engine and knowing what to put in to actually, you can spend 2 hours looking for what you want, and you have to try different
and then to work out the
words.
parameters. So I found that very interesting, because obviously when I was writing my first books, I went into the actual archives of the Times, which took quite a long time to do, and I went in there with Nora at the time, Nora Sutcliffe, who's an amazing, lovely lady in PA. But being able to access it through the computers was...
Online access just
fantastic.
saves a lot of time. It meant I could actually do some of the research from home.
But again, it was the key search words and then the parameters. Otherwise, you put in one word and you got so much that you couldn't possibly go through it, or you came up with nothing. I found that fascinating. David Rymel, our archivist, was such a lesson in point to me, because when we were looking for correspondence about the creation of the Dominion of Canada, obviously I was looking for Carnarvon, but he was the one who was looking for de Grey, who was Queen Victoria's private secretary. So I'd missed that entirely, because obviously that was to whom Lord Carnarvon was writing. Right, yeah. So he was the one who has helped me enormously just think a little bit rather than research in a random fashion. And the Earl and the Pharaoh had such broad themes running through it, from the Egyptian side to the cars, the horses, the aviation, life here and royalty, as well as obviously the discovery at the Valley of the Kings and early cinema and things. So it was an enormous...
It was a massive undertaking, let's face it. I mean, I think you made the deadline by about 2 minutes.
Yes, which was quite something. And it was a wonderful way of, I suppose, re-energising our friendship, which was always there, Smiles, but it's been amazing having some projects.
And also we're godmothers to each other's children, which definitely keeps us in touch on a regular basis. And now my mother's here, that's another reason why we're not going to lose touch anytime soon, are we?
But it's also some of that I've thoroughly enjoyed working with you again. It's been amazing fun, and it keeps the little grey cells working in our heads as well.
And we've done some work together with the festival in the autumn, which has been...
the History Festival, which began at the end of COVID and which we're going forward to strongly every October now. And 2023 is about the legacy of Tutankhamun. I thought we then might move into D-Day, and then to think about the end of the Second World War and what came out of it, and raise some money for charities as well, and think about those who serve and those who save. So those are my themes going forward, using the castle as visible history, but quite fun because I chuck ideas at you and
see what I come back with.
Yes. Which I thought would be really interesting, and encouraging people to read. How can we persuade people to read and to listen as well as read? And I've written now, I think, 3 coffee table books which involve cooking, and you were very instrumental in helping me hone some more cooking skills, as well as abandoning you to cooking while I was in the bar.
Well, I was about to say, I mean, you were rather better at preparing to greet guests and greeting them, and left the rather more mundane tasks of actually feeding the hordes to me. Although I think some of it did rub off. And I noticed that you did put a couple of my recipes or inspired recipes into your seasons book.
Yes, no, definitely. I mean, I think pears and red wine is such a great recipe, which I think I was your assistant chef helping prepare for a big lunch or dinner.
I did a charity dinner, a town and gown dinner. I did it 2 years running. I think it was 150 people in that tiny flat I was cooking from, and I just had to rope in all the help I could. So you may well have been peeling 150 pears, yeah.
No, I think I helped you with the pears, and I remember there was venison. It was actually, I can remember, it was a parsnip and apple soup, the year I was helping you. Then it was venison, and then it was the pears in a red wine jus.
The brief was 3-course dinner for £5 head, including venison as the main course.
No, I remember that. It was great, and I do remember huge vats of saucepans with the pears simmering, which was delicious, and it gives them such beautiful colour, actually. It's still one of my favourite puddings, but I think food is about memories, and when I was writing the Christmas at Highclere book, it brought back my memories of cooking with you, or cooking with my mother, or her love of apple charlotte, crumble, which was definitely a go-to in my
and I think the first cookbook I gave you was a Mary Berry one.
Isn't that hilarious?
Yeah.
Mary Berry, of course, came to cook with us for a cooking show, and she was here for 2 weeks, which was such a joy.
That must have been wonderful.
I remain a great fan of hers. She's an enormously fun lady to work with all the cooking, and your parents living in Gloucestershire and the huge breakfasts on the Arga and things like that.
The racing lunches.
The racing lunches, and I cut the nose off a brie, which I'll never forget.
Oh God, did you get told off?
I certainly did. I think your mother told me off very sharply for that.
Good. Quite right.
And then, because I don't drink a huge amount or was driving, I had a little bit of white wine in my glass. I'm afraid I poured some sparkling water in it, and I think your father was just about to hit the ceiling with me for doing something completely insupportable.
And I seem to I seem to remember that you didn't drive quick enough or with enough urgency to the races, because we only left about 20 minutes to cover the 10 miles.
And I was driving your mother, and your mother was sort of saying to me, well, are you still in third gear, sort of things, as we were going. And I could, her fingers were drumming at the front. And I was driving carefully, and I very happy tend not to drink a huge amount, so that was very good for me to very happy to drive. I do remember the journey, and I think I was becoming more and more nervous because it was my friend's mother, and it
was the only time in her life that she did anything with any precision timing wise. Those Cheltenham lunches, arrive at 12, leave at 20 to 2, and you get there before the first race, so you've only got 14 minutes to do the journey.
Well, I just remember cutting the nose off the brie, putting sparkling wine in white wine,
and driving too slowly. Otherwise, the perfect guest.
But it was extraordinary. So we've shared so much through our lifetime, actually, of loves or false trails in our love lives, and careers as they've turned different corners than you wouldn't expect, perhaps. And you've then been with me through the death of both my parents and then Geordie's parents. You've been to rather a lot of funerals for me. It's been quite extraordinary, Smiles. But I think friendship is always about being there, isn't it? Particularly at times of crisis. It's about hugs.
Better for worse, for richer, for poorer. I mean,
friendship.
There's friendship.
And now that you're once more helping me with festivals, books, writing, and our life going forwards.
That's always rather the fun part of it. I never know quite what you're going to lob at me next. Sort of gentle lob.
I'm not sure my husband does either. So I think Geordie is sometimes as surprised as anybody else. And occasionally when Geordie's away, Smiles, he'll ring me up and see how it's all going. And I say, it's absolutely fine, darling. And he sort of says, is there anything I should know about? And I say, oh, no, nothing at all. It's the usual thing about asking forgiveness rather than permission, which I think is always quite a good way to go forwards. It works quite well. Thank you for being my guest today, Smiles, and I'm not sure where our lives will lead us going forward, but I love the fact that I've known you and many other girlfriends for so much of my life, and I don't actually feel as if I have changed or you've changed. I know we've got a bit older,
a few more wrinkles. Yeah, but no, I think we're very much the same at heart.
As we were when you slammed the boot on your mop and broke the back of your car window.
I'm so glad we met.
So am I, Smiles. Thank you. just to say, please do subscribe to this podcast. Then you can be first on the list every time it comes out.